Daniel, your presentation was one of the only ones of the day on urban ecosystem services and how to use ecosystem services in a truly urban environment, which I think is a really compelling vision for places like the Calumet. But I'm wondering what the folks on the panel think of the problem of opportunity cost that we face in urban environments. We also heard earlier about establishing ecosystem services in places where there's corn and soybean farming, where obviously the opportunity costs are lower versus the high costs for real estate speculation or for cleanup of contaminated lands. So just wondering your thoughts on that.
I got a thought on that. I got a thought on most things, but basically what you have in the urban areas is the demand but not the supply, because land's so expensive and you need to do this, you need to scale the solutions, really. Don Hayes' project, I mean, you're not going to find sort of, wetlands that end at tributaries where you can sort of filter the runoff, because, the problem, not problem, but I guess where the discharges are where there's a lot of people, and so the solution needs to be scalable to the point where you have enough land to create the incremental ecosystem services to offset that impact. And so it's hard in an urban area. You can do things, don't get me wrong, but it's just a little bit more difficult because you have the high transaction cost and the value of land. When you have the ability to build skyscrapers like Jeff, no one's going to put too many constructed wetlands where they could build, some of his buildings at. So, but there are opportunities. They're just a little more challenging right now until these become mainstream.
I'd like to speak to that. Clearly, I'd mentioned briefly, and really it's a whole nother presentation I didn't have time to get into, the whole urban wet weather issue. Again, the combined sewer overflow, the stormwater, and even the point source, and occasionally even non-point sources, say in the case of cryptosporidium in Milwaukee. The stormwater thing is driving really the CSO, and there are a few cutting-edge cities. Chicago's one of them. Philadelphia, Portland, Oregon, Milwaukee's getting there, that are really moving out on looking at green infrastructure, low impact development, green roofs, urban reforestation, rain gardens, permeable surfaces, which, while people in the water sector aren't talking ecosystem services, in terms of least cost compliance and getting multiple benefits, it's the way to go. We're never going to get away from gray infrastructure. I don't mean to imply that, but even the sizing, say, of a storage a tunnel or whatever it is, or holding off, deferring investments. Time is money. But then generating, as I say, mitigating urban heat island effect, the aesthetics, flow regime issues, and meeting your permit number or your long-term control plan for CSOs. That's where, at least in the area that I'm focused on, is a huge area right now, and one that's there's still a lot of obstacles. There's regulatory obstacles. I think there's professional culture obstacles, but I think it's moving in that direction.
I'd like to ask a question that kind of piggybacks on that idea, is that a lot of what we have been talking about is farmers, big landholders, that in the urban landscape there might be more of an opportunity than we're willing to look at, that you can start to look at whole municipalities, whole cities, homeowners associations that can, in some way that single residences are, single homeowners are being left out of the equation, therefore not putting it on their plate as being an important factor as far as getting this into actual policy. So that if you could start to talk about, like David Novak did a great paper a couple years back on different land management in just urban green space, so that he looked at 2 city blocks within the city of Chicago, and different management practice, different land cover affected tonnage of carbon that was stored. Also goes back to nitrous oxides and different types of petroleum fuels being used. So how do you think that type of emerging market, or a creative way of looking at the urban landscape, could start to bring about policy, or could we reevaluate your assumption?
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, and that's basically sustainable development at its finest, sort of looking at the way we design our built environment and reducing the impact. And basically, I don't know if my mic's on or not, but Chicago and other municipalities sort of created the demand for this because they created land use zoning requirements to get your building permits to do it. I mean, before that, one of the projects I worked on for 4 years before it was the U.S. Steel Southworks facility not far from here, and it was one of the first. They were mandating green mandates before it was really mainstream, and the developers were freaking out because this is going to be so expensive. How do we pay for this? Blah blah blah. But if you want your development, you have to do it. And then now, just in the last couple of years, builders and architects and others have determined, hey, we can actually not only do this but save money and maybe even make money. I think what you talked about, you need to do for sure. I was just talking about sort of large scale, ecosystem markets, like sort of integrated ones, and within an urban area, or municipality. I think the biggest opportunity here, if there's anyone within a government body, is for sort of rural. And when I say urban, I just think I may call that like Chicago, but you're talking about maybe like downtown Joliet or Aurora. I think that's what you consider urban too, right? Okay, well then, yeah, there's a lot more opportunities than you would think. A lot of municipalities that want forest preserves, that want their wish list. Basically, if I represent a municipality, what's your wish list of green infrastructure? So let's start there. Okay, now how do we pay for that through private market, mechanisms? So that's where, and it sort of goes from there. Then you do the supply and demand analysis, but then you have the champion if it's sort of a municipal want and need. So it can be tailored a number of different ways. I didn't mean to limit it through what I was talking about. So,
I just want to say one thing on the urban thing, and this is somewhat random, but this is one of the first talks or meetings I've been to on ecosystem services that hasn't, and this is probably because we're in the Midwest, but discussed the New York City filtration avoidance project, which is, to me, the mother of all watershed projects and ecosystem services projects, where to avoid spending, $7 or $8 billion on a filtration system, they had an opportunity under the Safe Drinking Water Act to basically turn it into a watershed program where they're spending, $4 billion.
I thought they only spent one.
Well, it's going to eventually, when you get all the, and it's mostly their money. There's a little bit of state money and federal money, but it's a multiple billion-dollar investment is what it'll wind up in. Don't hold me to the exact figures, but I think the order of magnitude is right. And when you talk to the people in the DEP in New York City now, they're land managers. They've never been that before, and yet what an amazing, I mean, it's least cost compliance, but they're getting into buying fee simple properties, conservation easements, reforesting, riparian corridors, putting in BMPs, forestry matters. It's really remarkable, and I think that could be a model, I think, for a lot of things in the urban setting.
And to answer the $1 million question of this day, what are those ecosystem services worth? Just a little bit less than $7 billion. That's what they're worth.
That's right. The market clearing price.
Just a question about the Abu Dhabi project, because of course, I really appreciated the presentation. It's lovely. It's a great concept to investigate what could be sustainable. I wasn't clear on one issue. What is the purpose of this city? What are the people that are presumably going to live there going to do to justify their footprint? What's the purpose of this city?
That's a very good question. The purpose of the city is, you look at Dubai, and Dubai is effectively out of any sort of fossil fuel reserves. They've spent it all. And so they've now become net energy importers, and they are subject to energy price fluctuations just as we are in the United States. Abu Dhabi has approximately about 80 to 100 years left, depending on models and depending on consumption and what have you. So ultimately, they see it as an opportunity to transition to a new economy. So they looked at a number of models. They looked at Singapore heavily. They looked at other models around the world. They looked at Dubai, their neighbors. And they saw Dubai as really a development towards tourism, towards hospitality, very similar to a Vegas sort of scenario. And I think Abu Dhabi being the capital of the UAE, being a little bit more conservative, a little bit more structured in their thinking, decided to take a more sustainable approach, not only in terms of energy, but also in terms of development of intellectual capital and the establishment, for instance, the MIST, the Masdar Institute of Science and Technologies, which will be located within the city. It's an academic institution, and so they're investing in education. They're also investing in research and development. So on one hand, it's a research park. On the other hand, it's a academic institution. And it's really an outreach program as well. And so I think there's a multifaceted approach to the development. Yeah.
So with that, I would like to ask the speakers if they can take more questions upstairs as we move it up there. And I'd like to thank everybody for all the speakers and the audience, the PG staff, and the International House, and all of these fantastic students who have spent their whole day here volunteering and helping everybody out. So thank you.